Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to the Hyperion Hub, your meeting place for all things Disney. Now your hosts.
Hello, and welcome to the Hyperion Hub. I'm John Alois, and joined by Sean Degenhart.
Hey there.
And John Redling-Schaefer.
Hello.
Let's start it off this week like we do every week with our Disney views, and for that, we throw it over to John.
Well, thanks, John. And I think Sean is the one among us who's taken a very special tour behind the scenes at Disney. Right, Sean? Didn't you take the Keys to the Kingdom tour?
Yes, back in January of this year, before everything went crazy.
Yeah, before everything went crazy. So let's talk about something that's a little more stable. And there's nothing more stable in my mind than cast member training at Disney. And I believe during your tour you mentioned you were asked, or at least the group was asked, and you won the Star Pupil Award for knowing the 4 keys of cast member training. Do you remember that?
I do. Safety, courtesy, show, efficiency.
You're still the star student. Way to go. But maybe what you didn't know was that in September, a 5th key was announced. And that key was inclusion. And why is that important now as we film a little later in the year? Josh D'Amaro, as reported by numerous news outlets and websites, was speaking at the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions, that's a mouthful, and at their recent expo kind of dwelled upon the idea of pushing that 5th key as part of your Disney parks experience. The definition of inclusion? A policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized. Friends, I don't know about you, but I believe Disney already does an excellent job of inclusion. Let's think about their ADA requirements by federal law, sure, but the fact that the electric vehicles are allowed through the parks and get priorities. Their rainbow Disney collections and celebrations. I suppose maybe it's refreshing to memorialize this as a formal tenet or pillar of training, but I welcome your thoughts as I feel already, and maybe based on some recent announcements of new ride theming or replanning, that maybe Disney is already doing this. What do you guys think?
I was not surprised that obviously they're very inclusive, but to include it as a 5th key, I wondered, made me take thought. I would think that would fall under courtesy, just as a natural part of courtesy, but wondered, what was different about their definitions of inclusion that set it apart.
Honestly, I don't really have an opinion. I just think that they want to make sure that they're doing everything that they can, as they've attempted to do the last, however many, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, to try and make the park accessible for everybody and fun for everybody. And maybe they just want it top of mind at all times. I don't know. I don't have an opinion because I'm not really sure why they did this. I agree with you guys. Courtesy seems to fit there. But somebody felt like it was important enough to create a whole new level.
Well, and I think, like you say, doing that as a priority, especially recently, the retheming of Splash Mountain into The Princess and the Frog. Yeah, it sounds like that part of Mr. D'Amaro's announcement was also to make sure that was announced as a priority, no matter what's going on financially with the company. I think you're right. Maybe it is. It's just a renewed spotlight on that a new spotlight on that overarching goal.
Well, we are thrilled to have a very special guest with us today. He's a graduate of the UCLA Film School. He's a writer, producer, director. Jeff Sherman, son of the late Robert Sherman of Sherman Brothers fame. Jeff, thank you so much for joining us today.
You bet.
Jeff and I first met as Facebook friends, when I stalk people that I want to meet on Facebook and send them friend requests. And he accepted, so I was grateful for that. But then we actually were able to meet in person back in 2017 when I flew out to LA for the premiere of the Sherman Brothers musical Levi. I was fortunate to be able to work on the music production end of that. So we finally got to meet in person, and we've been communicating on and off for the past 3 years on various things. So very exciting to have you with us. First, I want you to just tell us a little bit about yourself and share some memories you have of growing up in the Disney world and the family and being on the lot and who you saw and things like that.
Sure. Well, I was about 3 or 4 when Dad started working for Disney. Disney hired them, my dad and uncle, the Sherman brothers, based on some songs they'd written that Annette Funicello recorded. And soon thereafter, he heard that they could write in all these different styles. They could write I always say he because it's my father, but I always mean my dad and uncle. So, but Walt really liked the Sherman brothers because the Annette Funicello albums were Italianette, Hawaiianette, different kind of things like that. So they could write almost in any style. And it was kind of a perfect time for them. Disneyland was coming up and he wanted to put songs in Disneyland and he wanted to have his own staff songwriter. So he hired my dad and uncle as his first and only staff songwriters. So I would hear about the movies, the different projects they were doing and all that stuff. And when I was old enough, they were doing Mary Poppins on the lot and the Disney lot in Burbank. And my dad had read me the book of Mary Poppins and explained to me all the magic that was going on at the studio. I've been there a number of times, but this day he took me out of school, took me down, and all the sets on the studio lot were Mary Poppins, everything, every one of the stages. Stage 2, where I ended up years later writing and producing on Boy Meets World, the big stage 2, the biggest stage on the lot. That was Cherry Tree Lane. Different places. One was the Uncle Albert's house where I watched them shoot part of the tea party on the ceiling. But he took me around for a couple of hours to all the different places and showed me everything. And it was really kind of interesting, but I was a little kid and I didn't quite get it. So we went back to the commissary, and it was called the Coral Room, which was the executive commissary. And I loved their tuna sandwiches, so I was very excited about that. That was the most exciting part of my day. And I walk in and Walt Disney came in, and I'd met Walt a couple of different times. He would be there when they'd have Christmas parties at the studio, and he would be there with all the kids and the characters and all that. And I met him a couple of times, and he remembered my name. He remembered a lot of people's names. And he came over to me and he said, "So, Jeffrey, I understand you were taking a look today at all of our sets for Mary Poppins. What did you think?" And I'm holding my dad's hand. I said, "They're okay, I guess." And my dad's hand went, that moment in your life where you go, "Uh-oh, something's wrong." And Walt looked at me with this look. And he said, "What do you mean?" And he got frustrated and he ditched the person that he was supposed to have lunch with. And he took my hand and walked me back over to the sound stage that had the rooftops of London where they did Step in Time. And there were guys hammering away and he kind of cleared everybody out and turned on lights in there. And he said, "This is the rooftops of London." I said, "Yeah." He said, "What's wrong?" I said, I just don't think anybody's going to believe it. And he said, "Why not?" He said, "I've had like the greatest artists and this is all done from, photographs and it looks exactly like a rooftop in London." And I said, "Well, yeah, but it's right on the ground, so no one's going to believe it." And he got this look on his face. Like, "This is the dumbest child I've ever seen." And he put his hands in a little camera square like this. And he said, "All the camera will see is this much, and people won't know that there's no ground underneath. And they'll believe that that's up on the top of the buildings, and that's called movie magic, and you can never tell your friends." So he walks, and I'm like, "Okay, that's cool." And I thought that was interesting. It actually started me thinking about like how you do movies and things. So at a pretty young age, I was interested in that. He walked me back over to the commissary. My dad was sitting at the writer's table. There was a kind of a big round table that the writers all sat at. My dad was having a scotch. I think he thought he was getting fired. And so everything worked out okay. They stayed there for a long time, so I didn't do too much damage.
What's so impressive to me about Walt Disney is the fact that he talked to you not like a child, but as somebody who he wanted to get your opinion. And he brought you back to those sets and wanted to show and share with you and get your thoughts. And then he took time to show you why it will work and how it will work. And that's just very impressive to me.
Well, I think that was his personal magic. Was he was a child at heart, and he loved You know, I just remember going up to his office as well. And he had, I don't know if you've ever seen The Office. They recreated his office at Disney. And it was just all these different projects. You could just tell there were so many things going on. And my dad said the amazing thing about him was he was so involved in every aspect of it. And people had believed, he said, he would go into a room and he would always storyboard everything, which is when you put the pictures up of the different scenes of a movie on a big board. And Mary Poppins was all across the wall. And he would come in the morning and walk right over to one of the pictures, pull it down and say, we don't need this one. And nobody knew how. And my dad said what he did all night is he walked around the studio and looked at all the work that was going on and pre-prepared himself for anything he was about to do. So he just had an amazing mind, and he really did care about what the audience thought. That was important to him. Even a little dumb kid who thought it looked fake.
Did you at least get your tuna sandwich that day? I mean, let's focus on what's important here.
I did. Once I explained to my dad I told him what happened. The guys were all laughing at him. The writers were, it was A.J. Carruthers and all these. They all would sit together every day and make fun of each other. So like he was like Mr. Banks, getting fired from the bank. I guess it kind of reflected in the movie there.
Tell the story about coming home from school one day after you had received was it the polio vaccine?
Yes, it was the oral polio vaccine. And I was like everybody else at school who was my age. We stood in line and we got a little, they had like a little spoon and a sugar cube, and they dropped medicine on it. And then you swallowed it and ate it down. So I went home, and my dad usually was at work till about 5:30 at night. But today he was there at like 3:30 when I got home from school. And he was really depressed. The curtains were closed. And I said, what's the matter? And I didn't know this, but it was the day that Julie Andrews, who loved every song that they'd written for Mary Poppins, there was one song they wrote called Through the Eyes of Love, which they thought was the big song in the movie. And she didn't like it. She just didn't think it was great. And so she rejected it. And so my dad and uncle had been sitting in their office, just, pulling their hair out, trying to think of something else to write as the big song, for the movie, Mary Poppins theme. And so he said, how was your day, Jeff? And I said, well, I got the polio vaccine at school today. And he couldn't believe it because I was that kid. I don't know if anybody else was in this group, but I was the kid when they brought out the tray of booster shots. I would push the tray over and run out of the doctor's office and hide down the street. So he couldn't believe I let somebody give me a shot at school. And I said, no, they put the medicine on the sugar and you ate it. And I watched my dad and something clicked with him and he just started going. And he called my uncle. They went back to the office and they wrote a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down.
No
so that's
way.
my little contribution to the Sherman Brothers.
I've got
Fantastic.
goosebumps,
Wow.
just so you know.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So growing up in the Sherman household, and obviously, you went to film school. Did your parents try to discourage you or encourage you from a career in the entertainment world?
I remember at one time I wanted to be a fireman, and that wasn't going over so well with my mom. But then that didn't happen. And then I went through the different stages of things, and I wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to be but when I got to, I first went to UC Berkeley up in Northern California, and I was an English major. And I did it because I had actually gone to Berkeley. I wanted to be in the music department because I wanted to be a composer. And I'd written songs. I'd had a couple songs published when I was 17, and I really kind of wanted to do that. But the first day, the teacher put on a vinyl LP of Beethoven and asked us all to start writing the music. And I went like, I can spell music. I can't put the notes down. And I walked up to him and he goes, well, just do the best you can. And I kind of walked out of the back of the room and I ended up being an English major, which I did very well. And I really loved writing. And I had made films and stuff, but I hadn't really thought about it. And so when I was a sophomore, they asked me to be a TA in the department. They wanted me to do that. Teacher's assistant, and I didn't want to do it. So the head of the department said, well, I don't know what you're doing here then, because what are you going to do with an English major? And I hadn't really, you just didn't think about it. So my roommate came back and he said, he said, "Come on, I got tickets. I want you to come see this movie. I just saw it. It's amazing." I said, "You just saw it? You want to see it again?" He goes, "Yeah, it's amazing. This huge rocket ship flies over your head and a big orchestra plays." And I got my clothes on and went down, and it was Star Wars. So I started getting really, interested in all that. And I heard that like Lucas went to film school, and so I said, maybe that's what I'll do. I'll go to film school. That sounds fun, and I can write and I can do all the other stuff. So when I got involved in it and I started writing scripts and doing films and things like that, I was writing my first screenplay. I was still living at my parents' house because I was back at UCLA, and I was typing on my dad's typewriter. I was typing the script for it's a long way around to get to your answer here, but I was typing this feature screenplay, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye, my dad was standing in the doorway. I said, "Whoa, how long have you been there?" He goes, "A while." He said, "I just wanted to watch you." And he said, "You seem to have a real passion for this, and I'll always support you in that." And my parents never, really told any of us what to do or what not to do. I learned the pitfalls of a career in entertainment because I watched my dad have that roller coaster, the Disney years, and then Chitty, and then there were a few years of nothing, and then it would come and go. And so I kind of knew that was going to happen, but he was wonderful, and my mom was great too. She supported it, and she used to tell me, she was my harshest critic. I would give her one of my screenplays. She goes, "You've done better," and she'd give it back to me, So, no, they always encouraged me to do all of that, and music and everything else that I did. I'm also a composer, so.
From everything that I've read and everything that I've seen, your dad served in World War II, and I know that he dealt with some of the things that he saw over there, but it feels like all of his experiences made him a very deep thinker. And so when you say he was in the doorway watching his son work, I'm sure that was just a picture-taking moment in his head. Do you feel that way, that he was embracing moments like that?
Oh, he was a fella. If you met my dad and uncle, which I know Sean's met my uncle, I think, right? So my dad was the quiet one, and my uncle will talk. I mean, they're so night and day. And my uncle has never passed the piano that he didn't sit down and play a medley. My dad, you wouldn't have known he was that. He did a lot of things. He was sort of a Renaissance man. He did metal sculpture and paintings, tons of paintings. Like I can't even tell you how many. And stained glass. And he always would have hobbies and roses. He grew roses. He was really, he was a songwriter in part. But really what it was he was a man of few words. And he would wait and he would digest everything, and he would come back with the perfect answer to whatever you were saying. He was a very thoughtful person, but he had a deep side to him, which he mentioned when he was in the war. He enlisted at 17, and he went overseas. He was in the Normandy landing at 17, and went up on the beach and marched through Europe, and ended up a Jewish man, the only one in his brigade, and he was the first American soldier to liberate Dachau concentration camp, and experienced that. So, and he had been a poet before that, and it really made an impression on him that he had to do something with his talents that would make the world happier, more understanding. So, if you look at the Sherman Brothers songs, they both infused it in there, and my uncle's a genius composer. And they really blended perfectly. They just found that middle ground that was why those things are so great. But my dad always wanted to instill things about friendship and charity and understanding and family and love and all these uplifting things. He didn't really like to dwell on anything dark. So that was his gift, and he was able to, share that with the world. And you hear songs like "Feed the Birds" and "It's a Small World," and I can go on and on. But they were all uplifting and made people in a simple way, not a preachy way, kind of open up and be better people.
And I think Feed the Birds, which is, I mean, that's the top for me. It doesn't get any better than that. But I think that's a perfect representation of, showing the simple actions and caring for people and loving others. And yeah, wonderful.
Well, that's going to do it for this week, but there's much more to this conversation. You can hear it next week as Jeff talks about the documentary he co-directed with his cousin Greg called The Boys, all about the Sherman brothers. That's next week. Until then, have a great one, everyone.
We're glad you could join us. We'd love to hear from you. You can email or send us a recorded audio message at podcast@thehyperionhub.com. Find us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. The Hyperion Hub is not affiliated with the Walt Disney Company or its subsidiaries. We'll meet you next time at the Hyperion Hub.